I think the deployment is going to accelerate soon. Like, we're really not missing very much. There is this enormous capability overhang. Like, even if progress completely stops, with current system, we can do a lot more than what we're doing right now.
Eventually, the models will, having read all the literature of the world about good doctors, bad doctors, it'll understand as soon as you say, I want you to be a doctor diagnosing somebody, all of the implicit reinforcement that fits that situation, will be there.
I'm Peter Lee, president of Microsoft Research, and this is the AI Revolution in Medicine Revisited. I'm really excited today to welcome two special guests to this episode of the podcast. One who doesn't need much of an introduction is Bill Gates. Bill, welcome.
Thank you.
And here to my right is Sébastien Bubeck. Seb?
Yeah, hi, Peter. Nice to be here.
One of the things that I've been doing just to get the conversation warmed up is to talk about origin stories. And what I mean about origin stories is, what was the first contact that you had with large language models or the concept of generative AI that convinced you or made you think that something really important was happening? And so, Bill, I think I've heard the story about the time when the OpenAI folks, Sam Altman, Greg Brockman, and others showed you something. But could we hear from you what those early encounters were like and what was going through your mind?
Well, I'd been visiting OpenAI soon after it was created to see things like GPT-2 and to see the little arm they had that was trying to match human manipulation and looking at their games like Dota that they were trying to get as good as human play. And honestly, I didn't think the language model stuff they were doing, even when they got to GPT-3, would show the ability to learn, in the same sense that a human reads a biology book and is able to take that knowledge and access it, not only to pass a test, but also to create new medicines. And so my challenge to them was that if their LLM could get a 5 on the advanced place in biology test, then I would say, okay, it took biologic knowledge and encoded it in an accessible way, and that I didn't expect them to do that very quickly, but it would be profound. And it was only about 6 months after I challenged them to do that an early version of GPT-4 they brought up to a dinner at my house. And in fact, it answered most of the questions that night very well. The one that got totally wrong, because it was so good, we kept thinking, we must be wrong. It turned out it was a math weakness that, we later understood that was an area weirdly of incredible weakness of those early models. But, that was when I realized, okay, the age of cheap intelligence was at its beginning.
Yeah. So I guess it seems like you had something similar to me in that my first encounters, I actually harbored some skepticism. Is it fair to say you were skeptical before that?
The idea that we've figured out how to encode and access knowledge in this very deep sense without even understanding the nature of the encoding, that is a bit weird. We have an algorithm that creates the computation, but even say, okay, where is the president's birthday stored in there? Where is this fact stored in there? The fact that even now, when we're playing around and getting a little bit more sense of it, it's opaque to us what the semantic encoding is. It's kind of amazing to me. I thought the invention of knowledge storage would be an explicit way of encoding knowledge, not an implicit statistical training.
Yeah. All right. So, Seb, on the same topic, I got as we say at Microsoft, I got pulled into the tent.
Yes.
Because this was a very secret project. And then I had the opportunity to select a small number of researchers in MSR to join and start investigating this thing seriously. And the first person I pulled in was you.
Yes.
What was that? And so what were your first encounters? Because I actually don't remember what happened then.
Oh, I remember it very well. My first encounter with GPT-4 was in a meeting with the two of you, actually. But my kind of first contact, the first moment where I realized that something was happening with generative AI was before that. And I agree with Bill that I also wasn't too impressed by GPT-3. I thought that it was kind of, very naturally mimicking the web, sort of parroting what was written there in a nice way, still in a way which seemed very impressive, but it wasn't really intelligent in any way. But shortly after GPT-3, there was a model before GPT-4 that really shocked me, and this was the first image generation model, DALL-E 1. So that was in 2021. And I will forever remember the press release of OpenAI where they had this prompt of an avocado chair. And then you had this image of the avocado chair. And what really shocked me is that clearly the model kind of understood what is a chair, what is an avocado, and was able to merge those concepts. So this was really, to me, the first moment where I saw some understanding in those. So once I saw this kind of understanding, I thought, okay, fine, it understands concept, but it's still not able to reason. It cannot, as Bill was saying, it cannot learn from your document, it cannot reason. So I set out to try to prove that. This is what I was in the business of at the time, trying to prove things in mathematics. So I was trying to prove that basically autoregressive transformers could never reason. So I was trying to prove this, and after a year of work, I had something reasonable to show. And so I had the meeting with the two of you, and I had this example where I wanted to say, there is no way that an LLM is going to be able to do X. And then as soon as I don't know if you remember, Bill, but as soon as I said that, you said, oh, but wait a second. I had the OpenAI crew at my house recently, and they showed me a new model. Why don't we ask this new model this question? And we did, and it solved it on the spot. And that really, honestly, just changed my life. I had been working for a year trying to say that this was impossible, and just right there, it was shown to be possible.
One of the very first things I got interested in, because I was really thinking a lot about healthcare, was healthcare and medicine. And I don't know if the two of you remembered, but I ended up doing a lot of tests. I ran through, step 1 and step 2 of the U.S. medical licensing exam, did a whole bunch of other things. I wrote this big report. It was, can't remember, a couple hundred pages. And I needed to share this with someone. There weren't too many people I could share with. So I sent, I think, a copy to you, Bill, sent a copy to you, Seb. Yeah, I hardly slept for about a week putting that report together. And I kept working on it. But I was far from alone. I think everyone who was in the tent, so to speak, in those early days was going through something pretty similar. All right, so I think, of course, a lot of what I put in the report also ended up being examples that made it into the book. But the main purpose of this conversation isn't to reminisce about or indulge in those reminiscences, but to talk about what's happening in healthcare and medicine. And as I said, we wrote this book. We did it very, very quickly. Seb, you helped. Bill, you provided a review and some endorsements. But, honestly, we didn't know what we were talking about because no one had access to this thing. And so we just made a bunch of guesses. So really the whole thing I wanted to probe with the two of you is, now with 2 years of experience out in the world, what do we think is happening today? Is AI actually having an impact, positive or negative, on healthcare and medicine? And what do we now think is going to happen in the next 2 years, 5 years, or 10 years? And so I realize it's a little bit too abstract to just ask it that way. So let me just try to narrow the discussion and guide us a little bit. The kind of administrative and clerical work, paperwork around healthcare, and we made a lot of guesses about that. That appears to be going well, but Bill, I know we've discussed this sometimes, that you think there ought to be a lot more going on. Do you have a viewpoint on how AI is actually finding its way into reducing paperwork?
Well, I'm stunned. I don't think there should be a patient-doctor meeting where the AI is not sitting in and both transcribing, offering to help with the paperwork, and even making suggestions, although the doctor will be the one, who makes the final decision about the diagnosis and whatever prescription gets done. It's so helpful. When that patient goes home and their son who wants to understand what happened has some questions, that AI should be available to continue that conversation. And the way you can improve that experience and streamline things and involve the people who advise you, I don't understand why that's not more adopted, because there you still have the human in the loop making that final decision. But even for like follow-up calls, to make sure the patient did things, to understand if they have concerns and knowing when to escalate back to the doctor, the benefit is incredible. And that thing is ready for prime time. That paradigm is ready for prime time,
Yep.
in my view.
Yeah, there are some good products, but it seems like the number one use right now, and we kind of got this from some of the previous guests in previous episodes, is the use of AI just to respond to emails from patients. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, so maybe I want to second what Bill was saying, but maybe take a step back first. 2 years ago, like the concept of clinical scribes, which is one of the things that we're talking about right now, it would have sounded, in fact, it sounded 2 years ago, borderline dangerous, because everybody was worried about hallucinations. What happened if you have this AI listening in and then transcribes, something wrong? Now, 2 years later, I think it's mostly working. And in fact, it is not yet fully adopted, you're right, but it is in production, it is used in many, many places. So this rate of progress is astounding, because it wasn't obvious that we would be able to overcome those obstacles of hallucination. It's not to say that hallucinations are fully solved, but at least in this closed system they are. Now, I think more generally what's going on in the background is that there is something that certainly I underestimated, which is this management overhead. So I think the reason why this is not adopted everywhere is really a training and teaching aspect. People need to be taught, like, those systems, how to interact with them. And one example that I really like, a study that recently appeared, where they tried to use ChatGPT for diagnosis, and they were comparing doctors without and with ChatGPT. And the amazing thing, so this was a set of cases where the accuracy of the doctors alone was around 75%. ChatGPT alone was 90%. So that's already kind of mind-blowing. But then the kicker is that doctors with ChatGPT was 80%. Intelligence alone is not enough. It's also how it's presented, how you interact with it. And ChatGPT it's an amazing tool. Obviously, I absolutely love it. But it's not, you don't want the doctor to have to type in, prompts and use it that way. It should be, as Bill was saying, kind of running continuously in the background, sending you notification, and you have to be really careful at the rate at which those notifications are being sent. Because if they are too frequent, then the doctor will learn to ignore them. So you have to, all of those things matter, in fact, at least as much as the level of intelligence of the machine.
One of the things I think about, Bill, in that scenario that you described, doctors do some thinking about the patient when they write the note. So, I'm always a little uncertain whether it's actually, you wouldn't necessarily want to fully automate this, I don't think. Or at least there needs to be some prompt to the doctor to make sure that the doctor puts some thought into what happened in the encounter with the patient. Does that make sense to you at all?
Well, at this stage, I'd still put the onus on the doctor to write the conclusions and the summary and not delegate that. The trade-offs you make a little bit are somewhat dependent on the situation you're in. If you're in Africa, where most people never meet a real doctor their entire life, the idea of being able to have some of this advice and diagnosis, is extremely advantageous because you're comparing it to nothing. So yes, the doctor's still going to have to do a lot of work, but just the quality of letting the patient and the people around them interact and ask questions and have things explained, that alone is such a quality improvement. It's mind-blowing.
So since you mentioned, Africa, and of course this touches on the mission and some of the priorities of the Gates Foundation, and this idea of democratization of access to expert medical care. What's the most interesting stuff going on right now? Are there people and organizations or technologies that are impressing you or that you're tracking?
Yeah, so the Gates Foundation has given out a lot of grants to people in Africa doing education, agriculture, but more healthcare examples than anything. And the way these things start off, they often start out either being patient-centric in a narrow situation, like, okay, I'm a pregnant woman, talk to me, or I have infectious disease symptoms, talk to me, or they're connected to a health worker where they're helping that worker get their job done. And we have lots of pilots out, in both of those cases. The dream would be eventually to have the thing the patient consults be so broad that it's like having a doctor available who understands the local things. We're not there yet, but over the next 2 or 3 years, particularly given the worsening financial constraints against African health systems, where the withdrawal of money has been dramatic, figuring out how to take this, what I sometimes call free intelligence, and build a quality health system around that, we will have to be more radical in low-income countries than any rich country is ever going to be.
Also, there's maybe a different regulatory environment, so some of those things maybe are easier, because right now I think the world hasn't figured out how to and whether to regulate, let's say, an AI that might give a medical diagnosis or write a prescription for medication.
Yeah, I think one issue with this, and it's also slowing down the deployment of AI in healthcare more generally, is the lack of proper benchmark. Because you were mentioning the USMLE, for example. That's a great test to test human beings and their knowledge of healthcare and medicine, but it's not a great test to give to an AI. Yeah. It's not asking the right question. So finding what are the right questions to test whether an AI system is ready to give diagnosis in a constrained setting, that's a very, very important direction, which, to my surprise, is not yet accelerating at the rate I was hoping for.
Okay, so that gives me an excuse to get more now into the core AI tech, because something I've discussed with both of you is this issue of what are the right tests. And you both know the very first test I give to any new spin of a LLM is I present a patient, the results, a mythical patient, the results of my physical exam, my mythical physical exam, maybe some results of some initial labs, and then I present or propose a differential diagnosis. And if you're not in medicine, a differential diagnosis you can just think of as a prioritized list of the possible diagnoses that fit with all that data. Mm-hmm. And in that proposed differential, I always intentionally make 2 mistakes. I make a textbook technical error in one of the possible elements of the differential diagnosis, and I have an error of omission. And I just want to know, does the LLM understand what I'm talking about? And all the good ones out there do now. But then I want to know, can it spot the errors? And then most importantly, is it willing to tell me I'm wrong, that I've made a mistake? That last piece seems really hard for AI today. And so let me ask you first, Seb, because at the time of this taping, of course, there was a new spin of GPT-4o last week that became overly sycophantic. In other words, it was actually prone in that test of mine not only to not tell me I'm wrong, but it actually praised me for the creativity of my differential. What's up with that?
Yeah, I guess it's a testament to the fact that training those models is still more of an art than a science. So it's a difficult job. Just to be clear with the audience, we have rolled back that version of GPT-4o, so now we don't have the sycophant version out there. Yeah, no, it's a really difficult question. It has to do, as you said, it's very technical. It has to do with the post-training and how, like, where do you nudge the model? So, there is this very classical by now technique called RLHF, where you push the model in the direction of a certain reward model. So the reward model is just telling the model, what is good and what behavior is good, what behavior is bad. But this reward model is itself an LLM. And Bill was saying at the very beginning of the conversation that we don't really understand how those LLMs deal with concept, like, where is the capital of France located, things like that. It's the same thing for this reward model. We don't know why it says that it prefers one output to another, and whether this is correlated with some sycophancy is, something that we discovered basically just now. That if you push too hard in optimization on this reward model, you will get a sycophant model. So it's kind of what I'm trying to say is we became too good at what we were doing, and we ended up, in fact, in a trap of the reward model.
You do want, it's a difficult balance because you do want models to follow your
It's a very difficult balance.
So this brings up then the following question for me, which is the extent to which we think we'll need to have specially trained models for things. So let me start with you, Bill. Do you have a point of view on whether we will need to, quote unquote, take AI models to med school, have them specially trained? Like, if you were going to deploy something to give medical care in underserved parts of the world, do we need to do something special to create those models?
We certainly need to teach them the African languages and the unique dialects so that the multimedia interactions are very high quality. We certainly need to teach them the disease prevalence and unique disease patterns like neglected tropical diseases and malaria. So we need to gather a set of facts that somebody trying to go for a US customer base wouldn't necessarily have that in there. Those two things are actually very straightforward because the additional training time is small. I'd say for the next few years, we'll also need to do reinforcement learning about the context of being a doctor and how important certain behaviors are. Humans learn over the course of their life to some degree that I'm in a different context and the way I behave in terms of being willing to criticize or be nice. How important is it? Who's here? What's my relationship to them? Right now, these machines don't have that broad social experience. And so if you know it's going to be used for health things, a lot of reinforcement learning of the very best humans in that context would still be valuable. Eventually, the models will, having read all the literature of the world about good doctors, bad doctors, it'll understand as soon as you say, I want you to be a doctor diagnosing somebody, all of the implicit reinforcement that fits that situation, will be there. And so I hope 3 years from now, we don't have to do that reinforcement learning. But today, for any medical context, you would want a lot of data to reinforce tone, willingness to say things when there might be something significant at stake.
Yeah. So something Bill said kind of reminds me of another thing that I think we missed, which is it's not the context also and the specialization also pertains to different, I guess, what we still call modes. Although I don't know if the idea of multimodal is the same as it was 2 years ago. But what do you make of all of the hubbub around? In fact, within Microsoft Research, this is a big deal, but I think we're far from alone. Medical images, and vision, video, proteins and molecules, cellular data, and so on.
Yeah. Okay. So there is a lot to say to everything to the last couple of minutes. Maybe on the specialization, aspect. I think there is hiding behind this a really fundamental scientific question of whether eventually we have a singular AGI that kind of knows everything, and you can just explain your own context, and it will just get it and understand everything. That's one vision. I have to say, I don't particularly believe in this vision. In fact, we humans are not like that at all. I think hopefully we are general intelligences, yet we have to specialize a lot. And I did myself a lot of RL, reinforcement learning, on mathematics. Like that's what I did. I spent a lot of time doing that, and I didn't improve on other aspects. In fact, probably degraded on other aspects. So I think it's an important example to have in mind.
I think I might disagree with you on that, though, because doesn't a model have to see both good science and bad science in order to be able to gain the ability to discern between the two?
Yeah, no, that absolutely. I think there is value in seeing the generality, in having a very broad base, but then you kind of specialize on verticals. So and this is where also open weights model, which we haven't talked about yet, are really important, because they allow you to provide this broad base to everyone, and then you can specialize on top of it.
So we have about 3 hours of stuff to talk about, but our time is actually running low. So I think there's a more provocative question. It's almost a silly question, but I need to ask it of the two of you, which is, is there a future, where AI replaces doctors or replaces medical specialties that we have today? So what does the world look like, say, 5 years from now?
Well, it's important to distinguish healthcare discovery activity from healthcare delivery activity. We focus mostly on delivery. I think it's very much within the realm of possibility that the AI is not only accelerating healthcare discovery, but substituting for a lot of the roles of, I'm an organic chemist, or I run various types of assays. I can see those which are, testable output type jobs, but with still very high value. I can see, some replacement in those areas before the doctor. The doctor still understanding the human condition and long-term dialogues. They've had a lifetime of reinforcement of that, particularly when you get into areas like mental health. So I wouldn't say in 5 years either people will choose to adopt it, but it will be profound that there'll be this nearly free intelligence that can do follow-up, that can help you, make sure you went through different possibilities. And so I'd say, yes, we'll have doctors, but I'd say healthcare will be massively transformed in its quality and in efficiency by AI in that time period.
Is there a useful comparison, say, between doctors and, say, programmers, computer programmers, or doctors and, lawyers?
The programming is another one that has kind of a mathematical correctness to it. And so the objective function that you're trying to reinforce to, as soon as you can understand the state machines, you can have something that's checkable, that's correct. So I think programming, which is weird to say, that the machine will beat us at most programming tasks before we let it take over roles that have deep empathy, physical presence and social understanding in them.
Yeah. By the way, I fully expect in 5 years that AI will produce mathematical proofs that are checkable for validity, easily checkable, because they'll be written in a proof-checking language like Lean or something, but will be so complex that no human mathematician can understand them. I expect that to happen. I can imagine in some fields like cellular biology, we could have the same situation in the future, because the molecular pathways, the biochemistry of human cells or of living cells is as complex as any mathematics. And so it seems possible that we may be in a state where in wet lab, we see, oh yeah, this actually works, but no one can understand why.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I really agree with Bill's distinction of the discovery and the delivery. And indeed, the discovery is when you can check things, and at the end there is an artifact that you can verify. You can run the protocol in the wet lab and see whether you produce what you wanted. So I absolutely agree with that. And in fact, we don't have to talk 5 years from now. I don't know if you know, but just recently there was a paper that was published on a scientific discovery using O3 Mini. So this is really amazing. And just very quickly, just so people know, it was about this statistical physics model, the frustrated pots model, which has to do with coloring. And basically the case of 3 colors, like more than 2 colors, was open for a long time. And O3 was able to reduce the case of 3 colors to 2 colors, which is just like astounding. And this is now. This is happening right now. So this is something that I personally didn't expect it would happen so quickly, and it's due to those reasoning model. Now on the delivery side, I would add something more to it for the reason why doctors and in fact lawyers and coders will remain for a long time, and it's because we still don't understand how those models generalize. Like at the end of the day, we are not able to tell you when they are confronted with a really new, novel situation, whether they will work or not. Nobody is able to give you that guarantee. And I think until we understand this generalization better, we're not going to be willing to just let this system in the wild without human supervision.
But don't human doctors, human specialists, so for example, a cardiologist sees a patient in a certain way that a nephrologist or an endocrinologist might not.
That's right. But another cardiologist will understand and kind of expect a certain level of generalization from their peer. And this, we just don't have it with AI models. Now, of course, just to you're exactly right that generalization is also hard for humans. Like if you have a human trained for one task and you put them into another task, then you often don't know, but you have other examples. So if you have 2 humans that were trained on a task and you put them on another one, then you can expect that they will do the same on the other task.
The podcast is focused on what's happened over the last 2 years, but now I'd like one provocative prediction about what you think the world of AI in medicine is going to be at some point in the future. You pick your time frame. I don't care if it's 2 years or 20 years from now. But what do you think will be different about AI in medicine in that future than today?
Yeah, I think the deployment is going to accelerate soon. Like we're really not missing very much. There is this enormous capability overhang. Like even if progress completely stops, with current system, we can do a lot more than what we're doing right now. So I think this has to be realized, sooner rather than later. And I think it's probably dependent on these benchmarks and proper evaluation and tying this with regulation. So these are things that take time in human society and for good reason. But now we already had 2 years, give it another 2 years and it should be really...
Will AI prescribe your medicines? Write your prescriptions?
I think yes. I think yes.
Okay, Bill?
Well, I think the next 2 years will have massive pilots. And so the amount of use of the AI still in a co-pilot type mode, we should get millions of patient visits, both in general medicine and in the mental health side as well. And I think that's going to build up both the data and the confidence to give the AI some additional autonomy. Are you going to let it talk to you at night when you're panicked about your mental health with some ability to escalate? And, I've gone so far as to tell politicians with national health systems that if they deploy AI appropriately, that the quality of care, the overload of the doctors, the improvement in the economics will be enough that their voters will be stunned because they just don't expect this, and they could be reelected just on this one thing of fixing what is a very overloaded and economically challenged health system in these rich countries. My personal role is going to be to make sure that in the poor countries, there isn't some leg, in fact, in many cases, that will be more aggressive because, we're comparing to having no access to doctors at all. And, so I think whether it's India or Africa, there'll be lessons that are globally valuable because we need medical intelligence. And, thank God AI is going to provide a lot of that.
Well, on that optimistic note, I think that's a good way to end. Bill, Seb, really appreciate all of this. I think the most fundamental prediction we made in the book is that AI would actually find its way into the practice of medicine, and I think that at least has come true. Maybe in different ways than we expected, but it's come true, and I think it'll only get accelerate from here. So thanks again, both of you.
Yeah, thanks, you guys.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks, Bill.
I just always feel such a sense of privilege to have a chance to interact and actually work with people like Bill and Sébastien. And with respect to this project of trying to understand the possible revolution in medicine that we might be going through right now, they were the first two that I really went deep with, honestly, the only two that I could talk to about this, just given the secrecy of the project. Carrie and Zach came later when we decided to start writing a book. And, with Bill, I'm always amazed at how practically minded he is. He's really thinking about the nuts and bolts of what can this do actually for people. And his thoughts about underserved parts of the world, the idea that we might actually be able to empower people with access to expert medical knowledge, I think is pretty amazing. So that's sort of lofty ambition and the kind of practicality that he spends. And then Seb is absolutely just a brilliant mind. He really has a firm grip on the deep mathematics of artificial intelligence and brings that to bear. And where that mathematics takes him isn't just into the nuts and bolts of algorithms, but into almost philosophical questions about the nature of intelligence. And in some of our long discussions, we even get into what does it mean to think? What does it mean to be human? I asked them to make some predictions about the future, what to expect 2 years, 5 years, 20 years from now. My own answer, I expect that we're going to be able to use AI systems to change how we diagnose patients, to change how we decide on treatment options. What we'll be able to do is encounter, if you're a doctor or a nurse, encounter a patient, ask questions, do a physical exam, some labs, and then ask the AI, based on all the other people who are just like this, how are they diagnosed? How are they treated? What were their outcomes? And what does that mean for my patient now? And that's just a fundamentally different paradigm of medical treatment and medical diagnosis that I think is going to become real. Within our labs, we call that patients like me. But that idea of really grounding the delivery of healthcare and medical practice in data through intelligence is, I don't see any barriers to getting there.